Hi, Al. I told you that this episode is going to be another hard one for me. So I apologize if I stutter or anything during the episode. I, of course, will edit, but there may be some things that I can't edit without losing some of the authenticity of the episode. So this episode is called Irresponsible. I'm Leah Batlle-Rafferty, and this is Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. Okay, so I talk a lot about how you have this internal dialogue and how it can really affect you and how it's not really true. And some things are harder for you than they are for other people. But of course, I didn't know this in college, right? So failing the first semester of my sophomore year, as I have talked about in the past, definitely started me down the road of feeling irresponsible. But I come back to my junior year and to everything that happened that year. And that year really kind of set me down this road. Even though senior year was a billion times better, junior year just totally landed some blows that I don't think I have ever managed to get over very well. So what else happened junior year? I was a double major. I was a double major with cognitive science and with computer science. And I had been asked by this person who was leaving, who had graduated from the cognitive science area, who worked with a professor that I worked with a lot in developmental psychology. So I worked a lot with babies, with, tests to see where they were surprised when things happened, to understand what they knew about certain things. There's a whole methodology to having parents not influence the way the children look. Anyways, it was fun. I always liked babies. I loved children. So I liked doing that kind of work. I was taking other classes as well, of course. But when I did the research, I was helping with a lot of these baby studies. So this student who graduated, who went on to another school, wanted to finish the studies that he had been running in my school. And so he asked me to please run them and to write down the results and get them to him. Email was a thing, but it was a new thing. So anyways, and this particular study was timed in seconds, and really close, tight seconds. So it was a study on whether or not children at certain ages understood how sand should behave. And I know it might not sound that exciting to you, but the point is sand behaves very oddly. And the way it pours and the way it moves and the way it should behave is very different than a lot of other things. And so this study was, show the kids sand acting correctly and show the kids a fake cone of sand that had been glued together in a certain way, and then time how long the baby was actually looking at the sand and record everything so that you could then get it to the second, right? Like exactly to the second. How long did they look at this thing versus this other thing? And make sure that you move through the showing and disappearing of things smoothly. So there was a lot of orchestration involved in this particular study. I was really proud that he asked me to do it. And probably by the fifth time I had done it in front of kids, I knew I was terrible at it. I was awful at it. Timing didn't work well for me. My body didn't move fast enough. I couldn't get things going in a down and up and everything and still record and take like the physicality of it was something that I couldn't seem to get right. And I practiced, and I probably didn't practice as much as I should have, but I practiced, and it just still didn't work. And he was very mad at me, very upset. And, you know, of course, I understand why. At the time, he might have been the one that's used that word, irresponsible. At the time, I was just like, oh my God, I can't do this. Why can't I do this? You know, what's wrong with me? This is something that matters. Why can't I go ahead and do it? So there was that happened towards the beginning of junior year. There was the fact that, you know, there was this class, and I've talked about it before, that I needed for my computer science degree. And it came out of electrical engineering, and this particular foundational class that I could not graduate in computer science without was something I was having a lot of trouble understanding. Nowadays, I kind of understand some of it, but at the time, it was really, really abstract to me. I couldn't figure it out, and I felt so dumb. And so I was going to go. I didn't want to drop it because I felt like that was going to be sort of my ultimate failure after a lot of failures, right? After failing a term, after failing at the study. And so I had convinced myself that if I went home and I got my dad's help, that I could figure this out over Thanksgiving, that maybe he could help me conceptualize it. And of course, during Thanksgiving is when we had the major car accident and we were hit by the drunk driver. And I don't know if I said this in the first episode, but yeah, we flipped over. We all got out safe, thank goodness, but it was scary. You know, the windows, we all crawled out the windows. We had little kids with us. It was scary. And that was the Saturday of Thanksgiving. And I couldn't focus. I just couldn't. So I went back. It was late to drop classes. Normally they wouldn't have let me drop classes. But I went back and I explained to my advisor what had happened. Yeah, I went back 2 days later to school after something like that. I don't know what I was thinking. I really don't, but I did. And I after I told my advisor what had happened, I was allowed to drop the class late. But I didn't feel like going through what I had gone through the previous year with my circuits class, where I had failed everything. And then I had retaken it and still gotten, I think I still got a C in it or something. But like, I couldn't do it again. I couldn't feel that dumb again. That incapable, that irresponsible, that horrible at things. And so I dropped the class, and even though I had almost all of the classes I needed to get through my major, I dropped computer science. So I ended up with just the cognitive science degree because I just couldn't do it. I couldn't. For me, that school, that time, that work was more than a struggle. It was like swimming uphill the entire way. there seems to have been something in me that held on, right? Because I graduated, I got decent graduation grade even after that sophomore year. I ended up getting into grad school for a year, which was another place where I felt very irresponsible, but I got straight A's, so it was very weird. The other place where I felt irresponsible was I worked for a summer at the time it was called the Lego Logo Lab. And what I had been tasked with wasn't creating these bricks that went on to become Mindstorms later. We used to create them by hand in the lab. It was to try to pick out a 3D software, which were brand new at the time. 3-dimensional modeling, like easy to use software as opposed to CAD programs, were very, very new. And see if there was one that we could use to model Legos. And it should have, it wasn't a good fit. Even now, I'm terrible at 3D programs. They aren't a good fit. Why? Because like I said, I don't have great visual memory, and I have much better 2-dimensional than 3-dimensional memory. Of course, at the time, I didn't have words for that, and I didn't understand that. All I knew was I was on this Mac, which, by the way, at the time, I did not like Macs because I couldn't tell what was going on. When some things went wrong, I couldn't figure them out. Mac OS 10 was not a thing. And so I preferred Windows and Unix machines. But anyways, that's off topic. I was put on a Mac because Mac was the thing that got the 3D imaging software. And I had to create these Legos, and I couldn't. I would think I had put them together, and I would spin the thing, and they would be like off, and they would be uncentered. And it got pretty bad. And I tried 3 or 4 different software, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I don't even remember how that summer ended. Like, I just know that at the end of the summer, I don't think they were too happy with me. I wasn't too happy with me. I was disassociating a little bit, like not in the psychological sense, I guess. Whenever I get too stressed, I lose myself in books and in fantasy worlds and things like that. And I had discovered multi-user dungeons at the time, and I was very much like spending time in them. In fact, I had to cut it cold turkey because it was going to start to affect my schoolwork. But either way, I lost myself in fantasy and anything I could find that would like make life feel a little less hard. Not alcohol, not drugs. I never did any of that. So it was just these mushes, role playing with other people, and, you know, reading my books. So anyways, the big thing was that summer made me feel very irresponsible. That fall made me feel very irresponsible. I had this litany of irresponsible in my head. The class that I told you all about with the archaeology, where we had to go to a specific library and I couldn't make myself go. And my friend was my partner in this thing, and I completely let them down because I couldn't seem to force myself to go to that library and spend time over there. It all seemed risky. My risk bubble was not as huge as I would have liked, and I hadn't planned, and so that made me feel irresponsible. I was just a mess when it came to this. So between knowing that my friends, people who I thought were my friends, would think the worst of me, and feeling like I was a screw up. I can honestly say that junior year shaped my mental model of myself in this very skewed, very negative way. I was very depressed, which I can talk about, I guess, in another episode, but I was very good at looking like I was okay, I think, while very much not being okay. And you know what? I made it through. Senior year, things changed a lot in a lot of different ways. So if the previous years hadn't cut so deep, I think senior year would probably have helped me even out. It did show me I could make it despite feeling like an imposter and like I was not great at things. But it didn't fix, I think, some of the damage that had been done. But yeah, it was junior year was hard. Even now, sometimes when I can't force myself to do something, I fall back on you're being irresponsible. And then I have to kind of smack myself upside the head internally and be like, no, you have it harder than other people. This is difficult for you. You are not irresponsible. You are not putting this off because you want to do other things. You are having a really hard time right now with either executive function or with forcing yourself to do non-preferred tasks or any number of things that derail you when you're trying to do the right thing. But once again, despite how hard that year was, I'm mostly okay. Thank you for tuning in to Memoirs of a Neurodivergent Latina. This podcast was written, edited, and produced by me, Leah Batlle-Rafferty. All music is by Carlos Neda. To send us an email, feel free to send to moanl@labradsolutions.com. That's MOANL@labradsolutions.com. And our website is www.moanl.com. And this podcast is part of Labrad Solutions, Inc.